So, hi everyone, and welcome to today's Inspiring Women Leaders podcast. And today it gives me great pleasure to welcome Deanna Oppenheimer. Deanna is a seasoned executive with extensive experience in the financial services sector, technology, and hospitality industries. Deanna's illustrious career includes significant executive leadership roles in banking at Barclays, which is where I first had the privilege of meeting her when she was the CEO of retail banking, making significant positive transformations there, I can remember. Also serving on various boards, including Thomson Reuters Corporation, Hargreaves Lansdown, and Tesco. Up until recently, she was the founder of Cameo Works, an advisory firm for early stage technology companies. Now, Deanna is serving as the non-executive chair of Intercontinental Hotels Group, which leverages her vast experience in guiding strategic growth and innovation. She is also the founder of Board Ready, a not-for-profit organisation born out of a shared belief that current business leaders must find avenues of inviting future diversity into the boardroom. And I think never more prevalent than today. Do we need an organisation like that? Welcome, Deanna.
Well, it's great to be here, and it's a real pleasure, Leigh, to get to be chatting with you again. You've had an illustrious career in and of yourself as well, and so it's fun. I always learn something when we have a chance to chat. So, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, an absolute welcome. And you are one of those standout leaders. I've met so many leaders in our lifetime, myself and Jonathan, but there are just some standout ones that leave that imprint throughout your life. And you're one of those leaders. Jan Carlson was another one from Scandinavian Airlines, but just not just about your transformation, not just about your leadership, but actually just the way that you show up individually with people. It sits there and it resonates well. So a pleasure, special pleasure for today. Now, it's always fascinating learning about leaders' stories, which are always diverse and rich with insights. So can you just share an overview of your background story and who the key influencers were in your early life that helped to shape you to be the leader that you are today, but also the person, your value system that you have today?
Sure. Well, Leigh, I grew up in a very small town in the state of Idaho, not to be confused with Iowa, but at any rate, which is in the northwest corner of the United States. And I'm the youngest of six children. And again, had a very great upbringing because I had all those older brothers and sisters that were fun to watch and challenge, and were very helpful. Two parents that were very, very loving and great in that childhood. But I grew up because it was not a competitive environment. It was an environment where if you could show up and try, you got to participate in things. And that means I did a lot of different things and had no real limitations on what I couldn't do, was always encouraged to think about what I could do. And I think that has served me well as I've gone through my life. And so then I had some teachers, as many of us do, that saw potential in me. I had some other teachers that saw no potential in me. And those are almost some of the better lessons that you learn, aren't they? Where I had one who said, you'll never amount to anything. And I ended up being valedictorian of my graduating class and went up to that teacher and, of course, had to say, well, I guess this is something for someone that hasn't amounted to anything. But at
Yeah.
any rate, that's great. Went on to university, studied at a liberal arts school, which you don't have those really in the UK, but it's a very broad-based education focused on problem solving and communication, which again has served me well. And then left the state of Idaho and moved to Seattle. Again, still Northwest, but the bigger city. So that's kind of a little bit of my background.
What what encouraged you to move to Seattle? Why Seattle is a place to go to?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I wanted to go to university and I went to a smaller city near Seattle. But I wanted to go to university at a larger geographic area. So a city was interesting. Growing up in a town where when you learn to drive, you have to drive to another town 14 miles away to practice how to drive through stoplights because we didn't have any stoplights. The call of a more urban environment was definitely there. But I liked the values in the Northwest. And you talked about values earlier. The values of really focusing on people. I think talent is the absolute key to success. I tend to be much more on the positive reinforcement side of the spectrum than ruling by fear. And there were just some phenomenal leaders in the Northwest at that time. And Seattle is a very entrepreneurial city. Today, we know of those great companies that were born out of entrepreneurialism, Starbucks and Amazon, Microsoft. But there's a long history of that happening before in the Seattle area. So, at any rate, that was some of the draw.
I think, those choices sometimes that we make in early life really shape the leader so much more. It propels us to a whole new level when we embrace maybe some of the opportunities that are out there. And when we've held events, we've written the books on inspiring leadership. Jonathan's writing his next book on CEOs and their executive team. So I think that's going to be fascinating when it comes out. The experiences that you had in early life really shaped, again, the leader that you are today. Who are the people out there that really inspired you along that journey, the standout leaders and what have you learned from them?
Well, on the positive point, first I'll say I had a lot more positive leaders in my life than negative, but it's really important to have the negative. I think not all overwhelming, but they bring out something, and I'll come back to that in a minute. For me, it started with, again, my dad was a big influence in my life. Again, with this idea of this reoccurring theme of, you could do anything you put your mind to. And I think that's really important because if you think about when I was starting out in my career, I didn't even really realize this at the time, but women weren't really working in professional jobs. They'd things like the United States Title IX, which gave girls equal access to sports in school, had just come into being. And so it was really on that leading part of the career that a lot of people would look and say, well, there is no role models that are doing this. But again, having that focus where the people that love you and are surrounding you are saying, you know what, you're talented. And if you want to go do something, give it a go. May not work, but if it does, that's a good idea. As I mentioned earlier, I had some really strong teachers and professors that were inspiring. But then once I started my career, I had really inspirational, what I'll call sponsors, not just mentors, not just people that are helping you find your way, but are clearing the path for you. And in my case, they were all mostly older males in companies that I worked for that saw, again, potential and basically said, these are the things you need to do, and we're going to help clear the path. One example would be, I remember I was working for, at the first bank I worked for, I was working for the CEO on a couple of projects, and he'd been requested by a leading charity in town to basically be on the board. And he called him back and he said, I'm not going to be able to do that because I'm too busy to do that at this point. But there's a young woman in this organization that is going to really be somebody in this town in the next 10 years. And you ought to get her quick. And you ought to offer this board role for her. Yeah. And he did, and they did, and I did, and it all turned out very, very well. But, there's nothing that he would have had to do that. Yeah. And reputationally, he was kind of putting himself on the line. I'd had no board experience, nothing that had come along at that point in time. So I think those people that not only give you advice and counsel, but then step up, make an introduction, make something happen. For those of you that are listening, those people are vital, and really look for them as you go through your career.
Yeah. It wasn't actually until later on in my life that I learned that you need to start asking and surround yourself by people that will actually be your sponsors, your ambassadors. And actually, the journey before that was so much tougher than, when you start that point of asking and reaching out for help and getting that network around you and surrounding yourself with the people that are your enablers, not the naysayers, that you listen to those voices that hold you back. I have to say, one of the things actually, because I do put you up on a pedestal, and I'm going to confess something now, right? So, of all the handful of leaders that when I get very nervous when I'm speaking to you.
Oh,
There's a
no.
bubble. There's a bubble of anxiety, and it's just like, but Deanna's the nicest person. I've had Jonathan coaching me here before I got on the call with you, and he's trying to teach me to calm down and slow down. I'm like, like this, but actually, it's with it, and there's absolutely no reason. So there's something inside that it almost like creates a narrative that actually gets in the way of you showing up and being your true, authentic self. And I suppose sometimes you can put somebody, when you see somebody who's at the highest echelons of leadership, but also espousing everything that you fundamentally believe in terms of a value system. And as you say, not creating a fear culture, spent a lot of time in the finance sector and a whole range of different sectors. And you see the great, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and all of that. Though you see these people at the highest echelons, and you can sometimes feel so far removed from that as an individual. And then that becomes this self-limiting belief, this bubble of anxiety, and you don't show up being the very best of who you are as a result. I just wonder, I think everybody can dream big. I think everybody can navigate towards the career that they love. Again, I'm learning this a little bit later on in my life. I wish I'd known it back when I was thinking I'd be a singing, teaching nun for a career. That's a whole other story. That's small town Ireland for you. But here you are. And I suppose advice to me and people like me that have these self-limiting beliefs, the women who struggle to kind of see that for themselves, or even more importantly, they put some barriers in the way that aren't actually out there necessarily, but it stops them from embracing the opportunities. And those opportunities easily lie ahead of them if they just embrace them. So what would your advice to be to people like me?
Well, this is first off, I think people like you, I think you're an inspiration, as we talked about earlier. And so isn't that interesting? Because often our biggest challenges are from within and not from without.
Mm,
And so we listen to that inner voice that's always kind of saying, oh, maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe this isn't right, or no, I just don't think that'll work, or I did it one other time and it didn't work, or something else happens.
or she's so
And
amazing. Deanna's so amazing.
well, and I think that then what you have to do is you have to kind of step back and you have to really think about, um, okay, what do I have to lose here?
Mm,
What do I have to lose? And this is kind of the whole advice and counsel and values that I grew up with in my family that I talked about earlier. You
mm,
have pretty much very few opportunities where trying causes you to lose something. Now, I guess, if you have to give up a job to get another job, maybe that's in that realm. But if it's meeting somebody or talking to somebody or walking up to somebody, I think that is that's one thing. So I think going through a narrative in your mind instead of, oh, I'm a loser and I'm not as good, or they're too highly, or they're not going to want to talk to me or anything else, thinking, what do I really have to lose if I go up and approach and speak with or just try? I'll
yeah,
learn something. I'll learn something, even if it's a disaster. I'll learn something along
yeah.
the way. And I think we learn more from our disasters often than the good things that happen. And the second thing, I guess, that I would say is that surround yourself with people that like Jonathan in your case, that is has the capabilities that you want to emulate. So again, if what you want to do is have confidence in meeting with people, surround yourself with confident people that meet people, and you'll learn something.
Yeah.
And that narrative on the outside, then, of where you want to be, helps the narrative of the inside come in and align. I remember once I had somebody that I mentored along the way, and he said to me, he said, I always sit there and I think, on my shoulder is Deanna. And I'm wondering, what would she say to me when I go into this situation? And she'd say, go for it. You can do it. You can step up and do it. So whether it's on your shoulder or in your mind or somewhere else, I think those two things would be my advice.
Yeah. And absolutely, there's something what's the worst can happen? That you ask yourself that question, and if that happens, what else, what more could happen? And it's actually not that tragic at the end of the day. And if we could put our egos sometimes to one side or our fears to one side, we could achieve so much more in terms of overcoming the barriers. And so we see so many success stories in terms of our job titles and this picture of perfection. But all leaders go through some really tough times. It's not just, hey, Deanna, you're an overnight success. You are there, you made it. And it was really smooth sailing. There's some really dark, troubling, especially in leadership. It's quite lonely sometimes. It's quite tough. It's quite challenging. It's very exposing. What are some of the darker moments that you've experienced that you feel comfortable sharing?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things. I think I started out with great leadership opportunities at a very young age. So again, I'm young, I'm female, and at a period in time, many, many decades ago, where there weren't a lot of women in leadership roles in financial services, but there certainly weren't a lot of young women in financial services roles. And I remember at one point we were going through a period, and I was doing a performance action that unfortunately leaders have to do sometime. And I had to tell this person that they weren't going to have their job anymore. And there was a series of behavioral things as well as performance things that had happened. And this was a very high profile person. And so human resources, in their indomitable wisdom, said, we should be in there with you. And I said, nah, I think I should have a one-on-one conversation. She said, well, we're going to sit outside the door then in case these things could go. And again, I sat there and I thought, well, what could really go wrong? I started going through, kind of the scripted thing that one does. And she just stood up and she said, you just have no authority. You have absolutely no authority to do this. She reported to me, she'd been a direct report, but clearly this is what she thought. She said, you have no authority to do this, and I'm just not taking this anymore, and I'm walking out, and I'll be back, and you'll be gone.
Right.
So when you have that type of thing, and you're in your 20s, and you're not real experienced as a leader, and you're kind of going, oh, that's interesting. One, I was glad HR was outside the door as she stormed out.
Yeah.
And two, then I had, again, my boss that came in called me that night and said, well, maybe this wasn't a good idea. Maybe this is a high profile person. And I said, well, you've got a choice. You can either stick with my decision, which is the right decision. Here's all the data and analytics, and we went through that. Or you could go with her and, we'll do something else on that side. So that was a very challenging thing, not only in the moment, it was unexpected. So what did I learn from that? I learned to always expect the unexpected. Go through every scenario of what's going to happen so that if the unexpected happens, it's like insurance, flood insurance. Hopefully you never need it, but you at least are prepared for it. Yeah. That was a learning for me. And the second thing was that once you've made the decision, you have to stick with that decision through whatever else can go on. The story was a good one. She actually ended up in a place that was much better place, much better role for her. I ended up staying in that job, moving up at that organization. But at any rate, I think that was one particularly in the moment, dark moment
Mm.
but as you came out of it, a real learning moment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You helped her find her happier place elsewhere. Just, I want to lean in a little bit. I do want to come back to the board readiness stuff as well, but just to lean in on the you have no authority.
Yeah.
Because I think that's really interesting, and it doesn't it across so many different areas. You have no authority. It can be cultural, it could be at different authority levels within an organization, but there are times in your life it's overtly said to you, you have no authority. And particularly for women, quite often they experience this in their roles. And so, what is it you notice culturally, systemically within organizations, what women are saying to you, but also what is it that systemically and individually people can do about that when there are those kind of toxic issues at play?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to be pretty grounded in yourself, right? So this is about going back into that earlier conversation we had. So when you take on a higher role
Mm,
in an organization, you have to believe that you can do that. And that means you need self confidence in yourself to believe that. So these are all the discussions about getting that inner voice right, getting prepared for the situation. There's a great story that I've told through the decades, which is if there's a man interviewing for a job and a woman interviewing for the job, the man will often tell you the um, 10 elements that are in there and why he's really absolutely perfect for one element and the other nine don't matter. And the
mm,
woman will tell you the nine that she's bad at and she's good at everything on that side of it. So it's really an interesting question
yeah,
as to do you have the confidence and the authority within your own mind that you can step up and do something.
mm,
Now, if that's the case, in this case, I actually, I had it on paper, I had it in everything else, but she thought that she didn't really report to anybody. She was kind of a floating, out there, high profile person that happened to be in this company. In the authority side of it, though, I do think that it is this idea of saying, can I do it? Can I step up and do it? And then am I going to have gravitas?
mm,
Meaning, am I going to be assessing how that room is reacting to me? And too often, people try to grab authority.
right.
It's almost like bird watching. You need to be still for the birds to come to you. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
need
yeah.
to have that quiet confidence first. And the first thing you want to do is ask a lot of really smart questions because too often people exert instead of inquire. And those are a couple of things that I think help on that authority and help on that side of it. And this is true for men or women. This is true
Mm,
primarily. I mean, I was on an executive committee of a bank at 29 years of age. You just didn't have that. I
yeah,
always felt like I was the youngest person in the room till one day I woke up and I said, "My God, I'm the oldest person in the room now." But but there is that idea of do you do you grab authority or do you sit and wait for opportunities to then really step up and earn authority?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I absolutely love that. And I love the fact that the inquiry, the great questions, the really building up, that listening, thinking that will engender trust as well. What more could others learn? Because so often either women lose their voice in meetings or overassert themselves, trying to gain authority? What you spoke about building confidence, and you've clearly navigated a journey. You are very confident. Whatever's going on inside, you are very eloquent, very confident, always. I've never seen you waver. How else can people really show up with gravitas and confidence? And what have you learned about your own journey to get there?
Well, the first thing is, I think in my journey, what helped and happened a lot is, I actually did a lot of theater. I did a lot of public speaking. So I remember I was going on stage, back to this thing of, do you deserve it or not? I was the lead in a play at university, and I didn't deserve that role. I mean, there were theater majors that probably should have had that role. But again, this director saw something in me. I went out there. It was opening night. I'm standing out in back, and I'm sitting there going, I can't do it. I just can't do it. I can't, I, I can't go. And I kind of froze, and, the cue came to go out. It was one of those typical things that you see. And something happened where I really, and since then I've trained myself that all those jitters, everything you're taking, it's kind of what Jonathan was telling you. You take this deep breath and you just focus and channel that to go out with great energy and doing that. And once you start, it goes. So what does that mean? Public speaking, I have that first sentence down, because once you get the first sentence down,
Yeah.
the rest kind of follows if you're prepared. So I think that this idea of preparing yourself for how you are going to show up in a persona. There's Toastmasters, there's, theater training, there's performing, there's a variety of those things. But you do need to understand how you show up and practice on what that is. I guess the second thing that I would say is silence is really your friend and very underused. So if you're in a meeting and somebody steps on what you're saying, you immediately cut off and sit back. If you're speaking, and you and I are speaking, you immediately stop, sit back.
Yeah. Nice.
Then they all of a sudden go, oh, something happened. So you see silence has come. Then you enter again. You really practice the use of strategic silence, because that causes way more. If we're escalating, it's a little bit like my daughter. My daughter rode horses when she was young, and I'm deathly afraid of horses. And so I was not riding, but I was guiding her horse out for her before this one horse show. And the horse started going back, and I started pulling. She goes, no. She goes, no. She comes up and she goes, let it pull.
Yeah.
Let it go. And then it calms down and it comes in. So the quickest way to have your voice be heard, it's just counterintuitive, though. Instead of escalating, you stop.
Yeah.
And then you restart again.
Yeah, it's superb. Absolutely love it. Now, you've touched upon something else here, and Jonathan and I have noticed this. You've never lost your passion. You've never lost your pace. You have so much momentum within you. I think, for decades to come, I think part of that's the way that you approach your health and well-being, your fitness, and your mindset, but you are absolutely storming it. And I just wondered what was behind that, what drives you, what keeps you really high performing. You're just on your big adventure with a board ready, and there's no momentum loss. There just feels like more and more momentum that's gaining. Where do you get that from?
I don't know. Part of this is I feel really fortunate that, I have good health. I have high energy, and I think that's really helpful. But I just am really, really motivated by people. And I just really enjoy seeing and getting to know people. And so at this point, um, that's where I get energy from. I get energy from people. Doesn't mean that I don't need downtime. Doesn't mean that I don't sit and binge with the best of us on, the latest Netflix miniseries. But it does mean that interaction, that energy of people is really important. Second thing is from mentors in my life, I've found the ones that I really want to emulate are the ones that remain curious.
Yeah.
They want to know somebody else's story. They want to know about that particular side. They keep making their world bigger because I think as we age, one of the challenges that happens is your world can become very smaller and
Mm.
you come into yourself. And so it's people, it's learning, it's interactions that keep you bigger, that again gives energy.
Yeah. And how does this, because you've transitioned from financial services, clearly in executive roles, but now into IHG and also board readiness. So tell us about that transition from one type of sector into another and the differences. And is there a difference in terms of the people side of things as well, the service culture? I remember you doing so much around service excellence and people engagement, even back at the Barclays days. But is there a difference culturally in how that plays out?
Yes, well, I've often said that the beauty of being in hospitality is the people, for the most part, are hospitable. I mean, there is a culture of hospitality
Yeah.
in that industry, and I was just at a big IHG owners meeting. Several thousand owners,
Mm.
all coming together throughout the United States, and it is that culture of hospitality. Financial services is great. The arm of financial services, as you know, that I focused my career on was retail financial
Yeah.
services. And again, that is interaction with people.
Mm.
And particularly in that business, when I was there, it was before digital had taken off to the degree that it had. And so, there were a lot of people that were one on one interacting in that side of it. So, at any rate, I think that the way one makes changes of industry is to understand, and this was my liberal arts education that came out. The beauty of liberal arts is you take something that you have studied in philosophy and you apply it to finance. And so that is taking concepts and problem solving and lessons and being able to communicate and apply that elsewhere. And
Yeah.
so that's what happened during my career, where I could talk about, okay, yes, financial services, but I ran teams of tens of thousands of people that were in distributed locations.
Mm.
Well, that's what hotels are. There's tens of thousands of people in distributed locations. And same thing in retailing when I was on the Tesco board and was the lead independent director there. So at any rate, I think that you can apply, but again, you have to always base off a strength of what you have achieved.
Mm.
So what you can't do is just jump in with nothing that you're bringing into that. So it's really looking at what am I building along the way. And I often say in a career, you want a big base. It's like a triangle. To get to the top, you want to have done a lot of things across the base because that serves you well for the next job that comes up. If you just try and climb a rope, you have one vertical, but
Yeah.
you have nothing on that base that is strong to be able to apply. Well, yes, in technology, for example, I had responsibility and accountability for a number of technology projects, and I never was the code cutter, but I did manage various projects and programs and departments of technology along the way that helped as it went up, for example.
Yeah. Now, so we've been talking about people. and really connecting with that broad network of people as a big enabler. But actually, you've touched upon in the past the fourth industrial revolution, and that there's a huge amount of change that's happening with AI and virtual reality and robotics, and that's fundamentally going to change the world that we live in. And often it's kind of presented to us as something to really fear, and be a bit skeptical of. And there's probably rightly so. There's going to be some challenges in the future around that, especially as we look at across social media, data and things like that. But I love how you speak about the next generation and how this is a really exciting place for the generations that are coming through that have all of this technology available to them. What do you see the opportunities are in this kind of changing, fast-paced world that we live in? And also, how can people prepare themselves for that? Because it's so fast-paced, and skills in a complex world, and the change of technologies and everything that's going to drive in the future. How can people stay relevant within those changes as well?
Well, it is interesting. And again, AI is going to be the next in many technological changes that we've all lived through and seen in our lifetime. I remember the first job that I had in the first bank that I went to work for. There was one computer that was on a stand, and like 30 people got to go into the kind of golden circle area to be able to type in whatever you were doing on this computer. And you look to see how far that dramatically has changed where we are today. AI is going to be another thing that takes that on. So, what are some of the key things that I'm seeing here? One is the world that I grew up in. You kind of had left brain jobs, accounting, analytics, data, and you had right brain jobs, marketing, communications, creative side of it. What technology has been doing, and AI will now completely bring those two together, is you must have both. So you basically will see, and I'm working with a company now that I'm really excited about as an advisor, where they're basically taking data analytic modeling and then what generative AI does in terms of language models and putting that together so that you basically have all the strength of the underpinning analytics with the narrative of how you apply it and how you use it. So what does that mean as the individual? So I saw a great saying that said, it's not AI that's going to take over the jobs. It's basically the people that don't understand AI that are going to lose their jobs. And so it really is this idea of looking at, how do I take this tool and have it work for me and with me? So you have to have, if I look at some of the people, the person, for example, who at Board Ready, and thanks for managing or for mentioning that, that's one of my really wonderful passion projects right now, where we're trying to get whole diversity of thought infused into governing boards. The woman who manages that is out of, college, got her degree in neuroscience 2 or 3 years ago. Very young, hasn't served on a ton of corporate boards at all, but she's taking all that application of understanding how you work with networking, how you work with technology, how you work with communication, to basically be getting out an expanded network. And that's what we're all about. We want to take and expand companies' networks into people that they might not normally see. So this idea of looking at these tools not as a threat, but as an enabler. But what do you have to do to be able to understand it and work with it? And I think that that's what's really exciting, because a number of the people that I get the pleasure of seeing in this next generation coming up, they get it. They know exactly how to do that and how to bring things together and then be able to expand. But again, it's those same things of what we're going back to, right? You have to know yourself. You have to be confident within yourself. You have to be curious. You have to basically bring together your experience in a way that's going to cause that to take off and go forward.
And what do you think the biggest threats are?
Oh, yeah, by and far, we're living through these, right? It's what you brought up in the beginning. It's culture, it's values, it's ethics.
Yeah, yeah.
And the biggest threat, I think, is that nobody talks to anybody anymore.
Mm.
So, except in your own little bubble, right? Your own little stream.
Yeah.
So, this idea of being able to really, and not talk over, but really, again, it's why listening, questioning is so important, but really trying to understand different points of view and what what motivates people to get that point of view, and then what can you learn from that point of view. And it's really hard because everything's going against us in the world we live in today, right? We all are in our own little bubble of our own little feed. I mean, I have to make sure that I don't get one feed. So I have to look at all different types of media that you're reading and you're liking and you're clicking on so that, again, those algorithmic models come up to you in a way that tries to keep things on that side. So I think it boils down to the changes are how do we communicate in a way that we can get a holistic view of things going forward? And we're in a challenging point for that right now.
And I think also what's in, because we've spoken quite a bit about agency and personal accountability and how we can help ourselves to navigate through this changing, complex world that we live in. If you then you are working with boards, you're advising boards, you're consulting with boards, you're helping to change the structure of boards and design them in the right way so that they're fit for purpose. But you could have a 50-50 board, male, female, you could have a very diverse board, but actually in the absence of a moral compass, and ethics and integrity, which you touched upon there. So what's your advice to boards around how they stay true and navigate through this, but in a way that actually is good for society, that we leave a great legacy for society so next generations can come through and do something productive and positive and make an impact in the right way?
Well, this is, of course, right. So there's always going to be a variety of cultures, ethics, and values. That's kind of what makes up the human race. So this is where I think now more than ever, it's really important that you look at leaders and leadership that emulate the values that you want to have and that you want to see propelled in the world. One of the things I love about IHG is it's a hospitable industry, but it's a great business model. But it has fabulous leaders. And some of those I got the privilege of getting to put into place, but many, many, many of those have been there before. So that is a company, a culture that has valued and has kept doing succession planning on leaders. So that's the big job of a board. A big job of a board is to make sure that those leaders and the successive leaders that are coming up are going to shape that culture and values in a way that you want to have that. And I think that's why this idea of how you align diversity of experience, diversity, not just in the singular way of either gender or ethnicity or, something like that, but truly of looking at how is my experience coming together with this team in a way that is going to advance the viewpoints and bring those together. So we'll be able to hear and meet the unknown and the unexpected in a positive way. That's why inclusion is so crucial on a board. So it's not just, do you have a diverse board, but are those voices heard? And are those voices articulated in a way that makes a lot of sense to do that?
And the work that you do at the moment, so Board Ready, is absolutely fascinating and clearly much needed, creating more diversity at board level, but actually through the senior executives, so thinking about succession, so to create some sort of sustainable pathway for moving forward. But I suppose there's still some startling statistics out there. So we've been speaking about diversity for quite some time. And what's interesting is you look at the COVID experience, and even for us as a charity, and within 2 weeks of COVID happening, because we had events going around the country, we were physically going to be in locations, and we had a plan around a strategy around technology and implementation, and it was going to take a year for this and 2 years for that. And everything got switched on in the space of 2 weeks, which is fascinating that when it comes to a very practical, pragmatic level, you just make things happen. But when it comes to a cultural, systemic level of creating change, we're still seeing some challenges across the statistics. And that cultural, systemic kind of change, it's still a bit sluggish and slow because there's no real burning platform. There's some evidence, but there's no real burning platform for people to make those changes. So, what's your thoughts around that, and how could we put some fire underneath people to create that diversity? And I'm not just talking about the isms in terms of, that we've got more women on boards or
Right.
Black and ethnic minorities, but actually the way that we look at age. I don't think age is talked about often enough, as well as kind of one of the areas that we discriminate against quite a lot too. But how can we get fire in the belly around an agenda that even almost it feels a little bit like we're taking a bit of a backward step rather than propelling ourselves forward?
Well, I think you're right. I think the numbers show that, right? The numbers show over the last year that there's been a backward step, certainly in the US and in the UK. But I guess my view is this. I had this question once when I was doing an interview, and somebody said, well, gosh, I'm only in my mid 30s and I'm feeling, pretty depressed. You must really feel depressed. And I didn't know if that was a comment on my age or on whatever, but I look at it again. We can look at it, the glass is half empty. We can look at it, the glass is half full.
Yeah,
So on the glass is half full is we have to focus on those areas because there are many of them where people understand that if we're all like-minded and we're all marching into a problem with a like-minded solution, we have one solution. The problems we have today, maybe they don't work with that one solution. Probably they don't work with that one solution. So we have to have people who have a variety of viewpoints as we're marching together if we're going to have the best outcome going forward. Now, that's a belief, that's a value.
yeah,
And that value and belief, in my experience, are held by a lot of people yesterday and today, and it'll be held tomorrow. So that's what something like Board Ready does. It's kind of the old model of, the starfish, which is all the starfish come up on the shore, the tide goes out, guy's walking down the beach, little kid throwing the starfish back in. Guy comes up to the little kid and says, gosh, what good's it going to do to throw that one starfish in? He goes, I don't know what good it's going to do for the whole beach, but that starfish is pretty happy. And
yeah,
this idea of basically saying you just have to look at where you see there's value and opportunity
yeah.
and people that will come in and you can make a case. You can convince and go on with it. And you just have to keep trying through it. And that's what I think. I've done a lot of research on diverse groups just make better decisions. They just do. And I am not talking about just physical. I'm talking about exactly what you talked about, characteristics, about experiential characteristics, about your background of what you've done in your professional side. Age certainly is a range. Term of service is a range. New views come in, refreshing of those things. They make better decisions. And so I think we have to, now more than ever, there are more organizations and groups and people like you that are helping people understand how they can go in and make a difference.
So now you will have seen organizations that are doing if not everything extremely well, some things extremely well. And I notice you like to speak in the power of two. So if there were two things that a CEO could do very differently, because you can do lots of things, but it's like it's like the log in the log jam, actually. If you kind of fire your arrow that a particular log or one or two logs, then the whole thing releases. Are there organizations out there that you've seen of doing phenomenal work? And are there one or two lessons that other leaders can learn? CEOs, actually, because I think the tone is set by the top. If you don't fundamentally believe it, it's going to die out. So, but one or two things that could make the biggest difference to creating that diversity that you speak about.
Well, I think one or two things that a CEO can do. One on the diversity realm is you just have to make a decision. You just have to basically say, if I want a younger leader, or I want, gender, or I have all engineers and I want somebody that brings a different background or whatever. You just have to have the strength and tenacity to appoint one or two or three executives in that role. And usually one is not workable, two is kind of workable, three is the magic number that you bring in whatever that diversity you want to do. And those CEOs do very well. But in general, for a CEO, in my experience, the thing that completely separates the great from the also ran is an incredible area of focus and the capability to organize the company in a way to keep marching down to that focus. And that doesn't mean that plans don't change. That doesn't mean that you don't get things that you want to do. But that idea of we are here to achieve these three things in a public company, value creation is clearly, top of that list. And here's how we're going to do it, and keep that focus lining up. People will align under that. And the second thing that I think that leaders definitely need, and I would say this, having been very honored to have received, again, your charity's Inspiring Leadership Award very early on, as you and Jonathan were pulling that together, is I think leaders have to have empathy. I think they have to have humility and empathy, that they understand the world around them. I've talked about these words that are all getting out of yourself: curiosity, empathy, again, understanding and wanting to understand that world and bringing it in. Because the problem is, as you rise up as a CEO, everybody tells you what you want to hear, what they think you want to hear, and they're not going to tell you anything else. So you have to combat that, because if you just keep going with what you think you want to hear, somewhere along the way, it's going to fall short. It just will. It may not in year one, it may not in decade one, but somewhere along the way, you will not continue to grow and be able to reinvent and do everything that you want to be doing as you go forward. So those two things, I would say.
Speaking of growth and reinvention, Deanna, in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, I think you'll still keep going years time. You'll still be developing, creating, enhancing, helping other leaders. But what do you see as your future legacy? What would you kind of look back on and feel very proud of if you achieved the goal that you set out for yourself? What would that be?
Well, right now I'm in a really fun time of my career. So I had the opportunity, as I talked about, in my 20s, an executive committee member, got an opportunity to have lots of big jobs along the way and lots of opportunity personally. But now what I'm really focused on is how do I help most people that I touch to achieve and be the best thing that they want to be. And that's a lot of fun. I also have a real great privilege that many people do, that I've got generational wealth in terms of great family, that are having family, and to touch that, and help them become the best people that they can be. But as I said, I started off with, Leigh, it's all about people with me, and that's the big focus. I'm not going to create the cure for cancer. I don't have the capability to do that. But if I can help the people who might do that someday, achieve and be the best they can be by touching them in some way, that's what I'd like to do now.
Lovely. And just another area I'd love to cover off, which is entrepreneurship. And because a number of our women are particularly interested in starting up their own businesses, being successful in those spaces. Any words of advice as a natural entrepreneur yourself? Any words of advice for them?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that, I think there's a whole new generation of entrepreneurs coming up and founders coming up that I'm really excited about. And those are people that have gone out and gotten experience, in usually, not an entrepreneurial role early on, but they've gone to a company and they've learned something along the way, worked with other people, and they are then incorporating that learning into applying to what they want to be inventing. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the best entrepreneurs are curious, and they're curious about others, and they are not as they are deep seated enough in their beliefs,
Mm.
because I get the beauty of, for example, the founders of Slalom. I sit on that board. Man, they have created the most successful company, and it continues to go from strength to strength. But when you talk to that CEO, he is absolutely laser focused on, what could I learn here? What could I apply? What more do I need to know? And that idea of being insanely curious, intensely curious, and bringing that back to what you're creating, is probably what separates, I think, great founders and entrepreneurs from the also rans.
Yeah, it's interesting with the brain of an ADHD kind of my brain goes like this, firing off. Actually, that laser-like focus and applying learning is just really important to actually achieving the outcomes that you're looking for. So thank you for that. And then what's the big top tip? In fact, before we go to the top tip, what is it that I haven't asked you today that maybe I should have asked you, even that something you've never been asked before, but you would have loved to have been asked in all the interviews that you've done, that you just like to share with everybody, that people need to know about you, your businesses, your ethos,
Well,
anything?
I have to say, I think you really covered the waterfront well, Leigh. So I don't know that there's anything there, but kind of that, that summary, and probably it fits in the top tip category, is that, I have a real mantra of, two things. I think that you're going up through your career and you've got to take a chance. We've talked about that today, right? You have to raise your head above the parapet. You have to recreate yourself inside to make sure, if those little niggly voices are being counterbalanced, you have to make sure you get the right people around you and all those things. So you have to take a chance. That means not just sitting back, but stepping up and taking a chance. But then once you get to where you really are achieving things, you need to give a chance,
Mm.
and you need to reach out and find others that are coming up through their career and their opportunities, and you need to give them a chance. So that's kind of my last, top tip for the day, I think, is that, take a chance and give a chance.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Deanna, it's been an absolute pleasure, and my nerves have almost dissipated. Almost, not fully, but it's been an absolute privilege. And thank you so much for your time today and all of your wisdom.
Well, Leah, I have to say it's been a privilege, and I think you took my advice, because I didn't see any of those nerves. I just saw a focus and an intensity and a great energy from this interview. So thank you a lot.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.